Hello and welcome to the Indian Express. As many of you know, farmer protests have again started. In 2020, the government had brought in three farm laws to reform Indian agriculture. That led to the first wave of farmer protests, and within a year, those farm laws had to be repealed. But these farmer protests have happened many times in the past, not just within this government, but in the previous governments also. And right now, the main focus of all the debate is on something called the MSP, the minimum support prices. Now, simply put, minimum support prices are announced by the government for a variety of crops. And its basic idea is to provide some kind of a safety net for farmers and also provide some kind of a signal to farmers on what to produce. So if the government wants more pulses to be produced, then it would provide a higher minimum support price. Now, it's very important to understand that minimum support prices don't necessarily mean a guarantee that the government will buy. In fact, data shows that government procures from very few states and only certain crops. Not everything that the government gives an MSP for or provides an MSP for, announces an MSP for, is actually procured by the government. And that is actually at the heart of this latest protest. Farmers have been saying that they want a guaranteed MSP. They want a legal guarantee for MSP. And many others who are on the side of the government, or many other economists, have been saying that that would be a disastrous thing if the government was to sort of give a legal backing to MSP. It is important to understand that a legal backing to MSP could mean we don't have a very good understanding of what exactly are the two sides talking about when they say a legal guarantee. But a legal guarantee could mean that at the very least the government would have to pay that much amount of money for whatever produce that the farmers have. So if I, as a farmer, produce a certain amount of crop and that crop is not getting sold anywhere else, or if I want to sell it to the government, a legal guarantee would necessarily mean that the government would have to procure all that produce from me at the said price. A legal guarantee could also mean that the private sector is also under the imposition then to buy it at that price. So if I was a big company into food processing and I was buying potatoes or wheat or rice, then I might be under that guarantee also that I must procure that food item, primary food article at that price, and that becomes a big issue because the costs might go up. That typically is the argument. Anyway, the central point right now is that whether we should give in India should go for minimum support prices or not of a legal variety where a legal guarantee is given. But the public opinion is heavily polarized along political lines here. So those who support the government think that farmers are politically driven and they don't have a genuine case, and that this is just a bunch of farmers who have a problem. And those who are supporting the farmers believe that the government is being very unfair and that there is no solution but a legal guarantee to MSP. Now, the important thing here to understand is that MSP has become the nub of the debate right now. It's sort of attracting all the attention, but it is by no means the heart of the debate. The heart of the debate is a simple fact that, and this is something that has been there for a while now, that Indian agriculture is not remunerative. Basically, it does not pay to be a farmer in India. And there are various reasons why this has happened, and it has happened for a very long period. Stresses might have built up more in the last 10 years, and that is true. But this has nowhere been a case that only in the last 3 years or 4 years that the whole problem has happened. It's been a long-standing problem that Indian farming in India is not a very remunerative thing for bulk of the farmers. So let's go and look at some sets, some set of data, slide by slide, and figure out what is the current state of play, and then perhaps come back to the MSP issue to understand what exactly is happening. Okay, so this is the first chart. It tells you about India's population. It is a chart taken out of the census data. It tells you India's population across each of the decades. It also tells you the total number of workforce we had, the number of workers we had, and then tells you how many were agricultural workers, those who worked in farms. Now, if you look at the last column in this, you'll find that in 1951, the figure in the bracket 69.7, so roughly 70% of India's total workforce was involved in farm activities, agricultural workers. And now if you come all the way down to 2011, then that number has come down to 54.6%. Now, the important thing here is that while this number has come down from 70 odd percent to 55% in terms of the total number of workforce involved in agriculture, the decline in terms of what agriculture contributed to India's GDP, that is not there in this chart, has been far sharper. So if you look at, say, the gross domestic product or gross value added in that sense, then you'll find that agriculture used to account for 54% of India's GDP when in 1951, when 70% of our total workforce was in agriculture. So there was a certain balance between the number of people involved in agriculture and what agriculture contributed to India's GDP. But in the last 60-70 years, while the total number of people involved in agriculture has come down from around 70 to 55, the contribution to GDP has plummeted quite sharply. It has now come down to less than 18%. So there is a basic mismatch here between the number of people involved in agriculture and what agriculture contributes to India's GDP. Agriculture by itself is not a sector which will see double-digit growth. So, incomes do not rise too fast in any case. And with so much population still hanging on to, being involved in agriculture, that becomes a serious issue. And this is one of the structural problems that Indian agriculture has, that there are just too many people dependent on agriculture for it to be remunerative. And we'll see, we don't have the data for 2021 because we didn't have the census, but many other estimates do suggest that, people involved in agriculture has actually gone up, so this is a reverse a trend that is happening where a developing economy, an economy which is growing, is seeing more and more people going back to agriculture. So that's one big area of concern. Now, the second area of concern here is also of the kind of, and it's available in the same chart, of also the kind of work that people are doing while they are on the farm. So if you look at it, the data shows that there are two kinds of workers that can be working in the farm. One is cultivators. Those are people who actually have a supervisory role, who can decide what will be cultivated. And then there are those who are working on wage. There are agricultural laborers. Now, if you look at it, again, the data highlighted in different colors, in green and blue, the cultivators used to be around 72% of the total 72% of the total people working on the farm, and agricultural laborers were around 28%. But as the decades have gone by, that number has just switched. Now we have 55% of people involved in the farms who are working just as wage laborers, and only 45% are cultivators. They are in some kind of ownership or in a position where they can decide what to grow. And it basically represents, again, the point about infeasibility of farming, the fact that there is impoverishment of people dependent on farming. They're finding that it's not possible to hold on to the land, maybe shifting, selling that land, working as laborers on the same land or a nearby land, and that is sort of capturing the kind of stress that is there. So this is not about, we'll get to state-wise data, but this is a nationwide data which is showing the kind of stress that has been there and how it has worsened over the decades. The third thing, an associated thing that you must understand about Indian farmers is the small and marginal land holdings over which they work and the high level of indebtedness that they have. So if you look at this table, and it's drawn from the Situation Assessment Survey of Agricultural Households, which is the latest we have from 2019. It shows, what kind of land holdings do agricultural households have, families, involved in agriculture, what kind of land holdings do they have? And it shows that 70% of all agricultural households have a land holding less than 1 hectare. And if you were to go to 2 hectare, then 88% would come under that category. Now, to understand what is a hectare, just try to understand that the Narendra Modi Stadium, where India lost the final in the World Cup to Australia, is spread over an area of 25 hectares. So, if you're talking about those 70% of Indian agricultural households who have a land holding size of just 1 hectare, that's 25 farmers over that area. And it has been shown by research that, around, 0.6 of a hectare, that kind of a land holding basically is not even good enough to keep people outside the poverty line. So, when you're talking about 1 hectare or 2 hectares, these are, absolutely subsistence level land holdings. These are not the kind of land holdings over which you can really make money. And the data is showing that almost 88% of all agricultural households have those kind of land holdings. So it just shows you the uneconomic nature of land holdings, and the table also shows you the level of indebtedness that is there. So if you find, in the highlighted area, you'll see that, 40%, 48%, 57% of all these, categories, households are indebted. And there's also data on how indebted they are. So, a household having a debt of around 94,000, for a family that is that small, with such a small land holding, to have a debt of 1 lakh is a substantial burden. So it just shows you the kind of stress that is there in the system. Again, it's not about one set of farmers who are protesting or not protesting. It's first understanding what's the state of farming in India. Now the next slide is on the country-wise data, the state-wise data. And here you'll see in the last 2 columns, you'll see the percentage of agriculture families or households that are indebted in any particular state, and the average monthly income that any family earns from being involved in agriculture. And you'll find remarkable numbers. For example, Andhra Pradesh or Telangana have almost 93% of all their agricultural households that are indebted, and the incomes are at an average level are just 10,000 a monthly income, 10,000 rupees for a family. A family is typically, a household is typically five people, so 10,000 over 5 people. And average indebtedness is around 50% of all households. Then there are states like Jharkhand or Odisha or West Bengal where average incomes are very low. They're around 5,000 or 6,000 rupees per month. And those are really extreme numbers. And these are 2019 numbers. Perhaps they might have gone up a bit with inflation, but there's also a chance that they might have remained stagnant. We do not know. Again, we don't have that kind of updated data for the latest years, but it just shows you the kind of stress across the board. Even some of the bigger states like Uttar Pradesh would have something like 8,000 monthly income. Now, another set of data that we should look at is something called the terms of trade between farmers and non-farmers. Now, terms of trade basically capture what the farmers have to pay for, the prices they have to pay for their inputs, say for fertilizer, electricity, whatever, and the prices that they get for their output, so that link between farmers and non-farmers, and the number to look at is 100. Anything below 100 means farmers are worse off than the non-farmers, and anything above 100 means that the farmers are better off than non-farmers in terms of the prices of inputs and outputs. Now, if you look at the data in the table from 2004-5, which was again at that time it was around 87, 88, the terms of trade number, it was negative, but it kept increasing, kept improving all the way to 2010-11 when it reached 102, 103 level. And since then it has again fallen and has rather stagnated at around 96, 97 thereabout level. And that just shows you that, over a decade or more than that, if the terms of trade have remained negative, and frankly, if they've remained negative for almost all the period, barring a few blips where it has gone up, that just builds up the stress because it's over such a long period of time that there is no relief in any way. So that's another data point that just tells you how the sort of odds are stacked against the farmers and farming as a profession. Now, another thing that you might hear often enough is that Indian farmers are, they have been given too much subsidies and that they are mollycoddled, they are sort of, they are abusing their privilege, and they are a lobby group, and nowhere in the world do farmers get this kind of treatment. But here is some data from the OECD, Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, which collates data across different countries, and it's a standardized format. And it tells you that Indian farmers are not terribly better off than the farmers elsewhere. Actually, the data shows that farmers in many other countries, comparable countries or developed countries, with whom Indian farmers typically compete, are much, much better off. They get much higher levels of subsidy, much higher level of income support. So chart 5 here looks at producer protection. It's basically the ratio between the average price received by producers, including net payments for their output, and the border price, at which they sell. So if the value is, say, 101.1, so that means that farmers overall received 10% above the international prices. So border prices here are, international prices. Essentially, it captures any value above 1 means that farmers are getting better returns in an international perspective. Now, if you look at chart 5, it shows you India at the absolute worst end of the spectrum. It's the purple bar. You'll see the bar for China is red colored one at 1.14. European Union altogether is 1.04. United States is at 1.01. So they're all above 1, which means that farmers are better off. They're getting better returns than the international prices. Whereas in India's number, the number is 0.73, which is like saying that, their returns in international comparison are worse off. So Indian farmers are not getting really anywhere close to what their produce would have got in the international market. And as you can see, many other countries are there, Brazil, Canada, Mexico, Korea, and across the board, it's India which is at the absolute worst end of this spectrum. Similarly, OECD also calculates another variable called the agriculture support, and it is defined as the annual monetary value of gross transfers to agriculture from consumers and taxpayers arising from government policy that support agriculture regardless of their objectives and economic impact. So basically all the money that is, overall flowing from consumers and taxpayers to farmers. And the variable here used is a total support estimate, and it is measured as a percentage of GDP. How much money is flowing from consumers and taxpayers to farmers. And here again, the data is quite remarkable. You'll find that the transfer is in negative, which means that the consumers and taxpayers are not, contrary to the notion that a lot of people have that, and this is 2022 data, contrary to the notion that a lot of people have that farmers have been, have been a burden and the taxpayers have to, bail them out. In the net sense, in an international comparison, you'll find that India is actually much worse off. It's in negative, which means the farmers are actually, paying the consumers and taxpayer. They are subsidizing in a manner of speaking, than the taxpayers actually taking the burden off the farmers. Again, look at China. The red graph is much higher, 1.7% of their GDP, which is 5 times our GDP. And we are at just minus 1.6% of our GDP. So which means that, again, blue line and orange line for United States, blue for European Union, just tells you how the rest of the world is taking much better care, paying far more to their farmers. And there would be inefficiencies in that also, but that element is there. It has to be understood that our farmers are not the pampered lot that, especially the kind of stark conditions that they live in, that often is made it out to be like that they're getting a lot of taxpayer relief. What's the upshot of many of these charts? And whether, the question still remains whether giving a legal guarantee, MSP, is a solution or not. Now, the important thing is to understand is there is deep distress in Indian agriculture. It is regardless of who is protesting and who is not, and who is getting MSP and who is not. And the question is not so much about whether we give MSPs or we give direct income transfers or we find some other measure of giving some relief to farmers. There has to be first a consensus on whether farmers deserve any kind of improvement in their terms of trade, in their general remuneration. Part of the problem is also the fact that the rest of the economy has not made enough jobs, created enough jobs to pull people out of agriculture. So if you're thinking about sustainable solution, there's a lot of literature which shows that just tweaking MSPs, raising them, or even giving legal guarantees may not be enough. This may not be a sustainable solution. A sustainable solution necessarily would require people being pulled out of agriculture. Instead of so many millions being dependent on agriculture, being involved in agriculture, they have to be pulled out. They have to go into more remunerative streams of work in manufacturing, food processing, services, and you have to figure out policy solutions like providing warehousing facilities, solutions which provide some kind of a backing to farmers, provide them the power to bargain. For example, warehousing. Without warehousing, a farmer is dependent. He or she has to sell the produce immediately. So there's just no way that they can bargain in the market like perhaps you and I can when deciding whether we want to buy tomatoes or potatoes today if they are costly. We can forego because we have ability to store at a time when the prices might be lower. So policy solutions of the kind which provide farmers with the backing to have better bargaining solutions. So it's a whole set of issues that have to be tackled. MSPs alone will not solve. They're not one-shot solutions to all the problems that Indian farmers have, because Indian farmers have a much deep structural problem, which just one solution of giving higher MSPs will not solve. Thanks for watching The Indian Express.